He saved 669 children from the Nazis. Then he spent 50 years pretending he hadn't. In the spring of 1988, in a quiet house in Maidenhead, England, a woman was clearing out the attic. Among the boxes, she found a scrapbook, old, worn, its pages filled with photographs of children, hundreds of them, names, handwritten lists, letters, travel documents stamped in a language she couldn't read, from a country that no longer existed by that name. She carried it downstairs to her husband, an ordinary retired man reading his newspaper in the front room, a man she had been married to for decades. She asked him what it was. He barely looked up. "Oh," he said, "that's nothing. Just some old papers." It was not nothing. That scrapbook held the names of all the children he had pulled out of the path of the Holocaust 50 years earlier, and in all that time he had told almost no one, not the press, not his friends, not even his own wife. This is the story of an ordinary man who did the impossible, and then spent his life hiding from it. His name was Nicholas Winton, and in December of 1938 there was nothing about him that suggested a hero. He was 29 years old, a stockbroker in London, the son of German Jewish immigrants who had settled in Britain, anglicized the family name, and built a comfortable, unremarkable life. He was a fencer, good enough to be picked for the British national team. He liked a good holiday. In fact, that December, Winton had a holiday planned, a skiing trip to Switzerland, bags nearly packed, the kind of ordinary plan that ordinary lives are made of. He never made that trip, because a phone call from a friend was about to send him somewhere else entirely and change the course of thousands of lives that had not yet begun. The friend was named Martin Blake, and instead of the mountains, he asked Winton to come to Prague. Czechoslovakia, at the end of 1938, was a country waiting for the axe to fall. Hitler had already annexed the border regions. Refugees, Jewish families, political dissidents, anyone with reason to fear what was coming had flooded into the capital, and they were living in freezing, desperate camps. Winton walked through those camps, and he understood something that the governments of Europe were still refusing to say out loud. War was coming. And when it came, the adults might run, might hide, might fight. But the children had no way out at all. There were efforts underway to rescue endangered children from Germany and Austria. But Czechoslovakia? For the children of Prague, there was no plan, no system, no one. So Winton decided he would be the one. Now, here is where most tellings of this story go wrong. They give you a single man, alone, saving hundreds of children by himself. The truth is better than the myth. And Winton would have been the first to insist on it. He was only in Prague for about 3 weeks. The people who stayed behind in the city, as the Nazis closed in, were the ones who found the children and got them onto the trains. A relief worker named Doreen Warriner, and a school teacher named Trevor Chadwick, who kept working even after the Germans arrived, when the work turned genuinely dangerous. What Winton built was the other half of the machine, the impossible half back in London, because getting a child out of Prague was pointless if there was nowhere in Britain for them to go. The law was strict. Every child needed a foster family and a guarantee of £50, the equivalent of nearly £3,000 today, lodged for each one. Winton needed hundreds of families, hundreds of guarantees, exit papers, entry permits, and trains to carry the children across a continent sliding into war. So he built it in his spare time. By day, he worked his job at the London Stock Exchange. By night, he ran the rescue from his kitchen table with his own mother, Barbara, working beside him to find homes for the children as they arrived. He understood something about human nature. A family might ignore a statistic, but they could not ignore a face. So he put the children's photographs in the magazines, in picture post, hundreds of small faces looking out at the British public, asking to be taken in. He raised money. He begged and cajoled, and when the paperwork could not be gotten in time, he forged it. Because the alternative to a forged document was a child left behind. And a child left behind meant a child who would not survive. It was not one man. It was a handful of ordinary people doing the work no government would. But Winton was the engine in London, and as it turned out, the one who kept the list. And slowly, it began to work. In March of 1939, the first train left Prague, then another and another. Children with a small suitcase in one hand and a numbered tag around their necks, boarding carriages that would carry them across hostile territory, through Nazi Germany itself, to the ferry, to the English coast, to strangers who had agreed to raise them. For many of these children, the platform was the last place they would ever see their parents. Mothers and fathers who lifted them onto the train knowing they were almost certainly saying goodbye forever, and choosing that goodbye because it meant their child might live. 8 trains made it out. 8 trains carried 669 children to safety, and then there was the 9th. The 9th train was the largest of them all. Around 250 children, packed and waiting, scheduled to leave Prague on the 1st of September 1939. That was the day Hitler invaded Poland. The borders slammed shut across German-controlled Europe. The war had begun. The 9th train never moved. Of the roughly 250 children who should have been on it, only 2 are known to have survived the war. The rest were swallowed by the camps, Terezin, Auschwitz. Winton would later say that none of them were ever heard from again. He had saved 669, and he would spend the rest of his life haunted by the ones on that last train he could not save. When the war ended, Nicholas Winton did not tell his story. He came home, he married, he built a career, raised a family, grew old in a quiet English town, and the scrapbook, the names, the faces, the proof of what he had done, went up into the attic and stayed there for nearly 50 years. Why? We don't fully know. He never gave a tidy answer. Perhaps it was guilt, the arithmetic of a man who could not celebrate 669 saved while 250 were lost. Perhaps he simply didn't believe that doing the obvious, decent thing made him anything special. His own philosophy was almost stubbornly plain. "I believe in ethics," he once said, "and if everybody believed in ethics, we'd have no problems at all." To him, saving those children hadn't been heroism. It had simply been the right thing in front of him. And you don't spend your life bragging about doing the right thing. For 50 years, the greatest thing he ever did was a secret he kept even from the people who loved him. Then his wife found the attic. The scrapbook led, eventually, to the BBC and to a television program called That's Life, hosted by Esther Rantzen. What happened next has been watched by tens of millions of people, and it is almost unbearable to describe. Winton was invited into the studio audience, told only that he was there to watch the show. On air, Ranson held up his scrapbook and told his story. Then she turned to the woman sitting quietly beside him, a woman named Vera Gissing, and revealed that she was one of the children he had saved. Winton, an old man now, turned to look at her, and his eyes filled. And then Ranson asked a simple question. She asked everyone in that studio who owed their life to Nicholas Winton to please stand up. Around him, more than 24 people rose to their feet. Then she asked again. Anyone who was a child or a grandchild of someone Winton had saved. And the rest of the audience stood. They were all his. The children he had pulled from Prague, grown now, and the generations that had followed them, surrounding him, standing for him. He had no idea. For 50 years he had believed his story was just some old papers in an attic, and now it was standing all around him, alive and looking back. Here is the number that is almost impossible to hold in your mind. 669 children were saved, so many and so scattered that more than 370 of them were never traced again. Grown and gone into the world, their fates unknown even to the man who had saved them. But the ones who lived. They grew up, they had children, and those children had children. Today, it is estimated that around 6,000 people are alive on this earth who would never have existed at all if a handful of ordinary people had looked away in the winter of 1938, and if one young stockbroker had gone skiing instead of answering the phone. 6,000 lives, traced back to a man who thought he'd done nothing worth mentioning. Nicholas Winton died on the 1st of July 2015. He was 106 years old. He lived long enough to be knighted, to be honored across the world, and to meet again and again the descendants of the children he pulled from the dark. And still, right to the end, he never quite accepted the word hero. He believed the silence was the natural thing, that you help and then you get on with your life and you don't make a fuss. Maybe that was humility, or maybe it was a wound that simply never closed. The 9th train and the 250 he couldn't reach. So here is the question this story leaves behind. Nicholas Winton was not a soldier or a statesman or a man of unusual power. He was ordinary. And when the moment came, he simply decided that the impossible was worth attempting anyway. And then he never asked for credit for it. What would you have done in that hotel room in Prague with a country collapsing around you? Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you. And if you want more of the story's history left in the shadows, the people and moments that quietly changed everything and were nearly forgotten, subscribe to Chronicles Unknown, because the next untold chronicle is already waiting.